In this video, we're going to work with area charts. Area charts are very similar to line charts in that they show change over time. The key difference being that the area between the line and the x-axis is shaded in. So for example, taking our long-term CO2, I'm going to come up to chart design, come to change chart type, come down to area and choose area chart. And when I say OK, very similar, but arguably a little bit more eye-catching. There are, however, situations where the area chart may prove to be a more effective visualization. Let's look at an example. So we're going to come to emissions by region, and Rohan has already created a line chart tracking the increase in emissions by the major world regions. Unfortunately, this chart is really messy, and so not so easy to read. What Rohan would ideally like to show is the proportional increase by region in emissions as well as the total increase, and he can do this by using a stacked area chart. Very similar to the stacked column chart we saw in our first topic this week. So we're going to click on the emissions by region chart, and we're going to come to change chart type. We're going to come down to area, and if we were to choose just a standard area chart, you can see that's not really going to solve the problem. If anything, it's making it worse because I can't see all the areas that are hidden behind the others. So I'm not going to choose that option. I'm going to choose the stacked area. We're going to say OK. And there is a very attractive and readable chart. Great, let's copy that. So just click on the edge, Ctrl C, come back to our line and area, and we'll just pop that into B31. And now we've got one final example that we're going to create from scratch. So we're going to come to our last tab, which are emissions by sector. But here Rohan wants to do something quite different. He actually wants to see how the different sectors' proportional contributions to CO2 have changed over time. So we're not looking for the actual amount, but the proportion, a bit more like a pie chart. And for this, we're going to use a 100% stacked chart. So start by clicking into C3, hold Ctrl Shift down and press your right arrow and your down arrow. Then release Ctrl and Shift, and then we're going to come to our insert. We're going to come across to line chart, but we're going to choose the 100% stacked area, and this will show us the percentage contribution of each of our sectors. With the chart still selected, we're going to come to Format, and we're going to make it again 14 high by 24 wide like the last video. And now I'm just going to move it up so you can see it more easily. Again, we're going to need to fix our horizontal axis. So good revision, we can come to chart design, select data, click edit under horizontal category axis, click onto 1960 and Ctrl Shift down arrow, and then press enter and click OK. Of course, we should give this chart a proper title. So clicking into chart title, I'm going to press Ctrl A and type emissions by sector. And then one final little formatting tweak we'd like to make. Instead of showing the labels on the legend, we would actually like to see the labels on the segments again, more like a pie chart. So we're going to come to our chart elements, we're going to turn off our legend, and instead we're going to turn our data labels on. But oh dear, what a mess. Instead of putting the series label, it's put the value labels. But we can easily change this. So click onto one set of data labels, and then another way to get that panel on the right open, we're going to right click and format data labels. Now you see at the moment it's showing the value. We're going to untick value and turn series name on. Now unfortunately, we have to do this one at a time, but it's pretty quick. We're just going to untick value, turn on series, and then repeat that for each of our series. Now this will probably look a little better in white, so I'm going to come to my Home tab, make them white, maybe increase the size, and then to apply that to the others, I'm going to use my Format Painter. So I'm going to double click the Format Painter and then just single click onto each of my labels, which will apply the same formatting. Then single click on your Format Painter again to turn it off. Now let's select our whole chart, Ctrl C, come back to our line and area chart, pop it into P31 to complete your emissions overview report. One last thing we're going to talk about in this video, and that's colors. When we're using visualizations, obviously colors are very important. And it may be that the colors you see here will not represent your organization or the type of data that you're trying to represent. Now there are two ways you can approach this. For example, coming to our emissions by region, these two last series are not really standing out. So I'm going to click on the second last series, and I'm going to come to my Format tab, and I'm going to come to my Shape Fill, and you've got some theme colors, and generally I'd recommend use the theme colors, but if you don't want to, you can come to More Fill Colors, Custom, and there's so much you can choose from. I'm going to come back to Standard, and I'm going to go for quite a dark blue and say OK. I'm going to choose my last series, and I'm just going to make that a light blue. So that's one way you could approach it, but we've already created quite a lot of charts, and to manually go and change each of the colors in each of those charts is going to be very time consuming. And we also run the risk of losing consistency. So a better approach is to come to your Page Layout tab, come to the Themes button, which controls the colors used within your workbook, and you'll see as I hover over the different themes, it completely changes the color scheme and sometimes the font scheme within your workbook. When you find one that you like the look of, you can click to apply the changes. Now you'll notice that has also changed my font, and if I don't want that to happen, you can mix and match. If I come back to fonts, I can just set it back to Calibri, and you could just go and change your colors. You even have the option to come down to customize colors, and you can go and set up your own color scheme altogether. We're not going to do that now though. You'll notice, having changed our colors, all the colors in the workbook, not just on this sheet, but on the pies and donuts and the techniques, have changed except for those two blues that I added before. And that's because they weren't themed colors. So the benefit of using theme colors is when you change your theme, the colors all change. And I'm going to go back, I'm going to undo, and set it back to the colors that I had before because I really like those colors. But you have a play, find a color scheme that works for you. In this video, we're going to look at how we can explore correlations in our data using scatter charts and bubble charts. Rowan has a suspicion that there is a relationship between a country's per capita GDP and their emissions, and he'd like to explore that visually. Now we have the per capita GDP and the per capita emissions data, and what we're going to do is show that data on a scatter chart. Now usually when we create a column chart or a line chart, we only provide a numeric value for the y-axis. The x-axis just has text labels or a year label. But in this situation, we actually want a numeric value for both. So we're going to start by selecting two columns with numeric data in. And that's going to be our GDP and our emissions. What Excel will do is use the first column that you select as your x-axis and the second column that you select as your y-axis. But obviously you can swap these around. Now I'm going to press Ctrl Shift down arrow, and then just scrolling up, I'm going to come to my Insert tab on my ribbon. I'm going to come to Charts, and we're going to look for the Insert, Scatter or Bubble chart. And then to begin with, we're just going to start with a straightforward scatter chart, and I want to make that a fair bit bigger. And you can see Rowan's suspicions are largely correct. We can definitely see an upward trajectory, As our GDP increases, so do our emissions. Now we can pretty easily spot these are the GDP per capita values because they are the big numbers. But for somebody coming new into this chart, it would be very helpful if we had labels on our axes. So let's do that. We're going to come to our chart elements. We're going to turn axis titles on, and then we just come and edit the title. So I'm going to triple click on the first one, and that's our emissions. And then I'm going to triple click in my horizontal axis, and that's my GDP per capita. And while I'm at it, I'll give my chart a label. So I'm going to triple click up there as well. And this is going to be GDP per capita versus emissions. Now, one of the downsides is that with a scatter chart, we don't automatically get labels for our data points. But in the newer versions of Excel, you can actually add those labels if you want to. We've got quite a lot of data here, so it's going to look very messy, but I'd like you to see how to do it. So again, we're going to come to our chart elements. I'm going to turn our data labels on, but it's used the emissions values, which is not what we want. So if you come to your panel, and if you don't see your panel there, just click the black arrow outside data labels and choose more options, and that will bring you into your options for your data labels. I'm going to click text options, label options, unselect Y value, and we're going to get a value from cells instead. And now we can just click on our first country and press Ctrl Shift down arrow and OK. Page up a couple of times, and you can see it has actually added the country names. As I said though, we have so many countries that it's getting kind of messy in here. But if you just need a sneak peek, or if you had a lot less data, it is really handy to know. Alright, we're actually going to switch those labels off. Now another piece of data that Rohan would like to show on this chart is the population for each of these countries. A scatter plot can only represent an X and a Y value. But there's a newer chart called a bubble chart, which will also allow you to represent a third variable. And it shows that as the bubble size. The smaller values get small bubbles, and the larger values get large bubbles. And that's what we can do with our population data. So with your chart selected, we're going to come to change chart type, and we're going to choose a nice 3D bubble. But you could choose either 2D or 3D. And we're going to say OK. Now at the moment, it looks very strange because all of our bubbles are the same size. So we need now to tell Excel where to get that third set of values from. And we're going to do that by coming to select data. You'll see we have a single series at the moment. We're going to edit that series. And the bubble size has been set to 1 for all the bubbles. So we're just going to remove that information. And instead, we're going to select our population. So click D4 and Ctrl Shift down arrow, and then click OK and OK. Page up a couple of times again, and that's looking much better. But these two massive bubbles over here, which I think we can guess are China and India, are dominating everything. So we have another option, and that is to scale our bubbles. So just select one bubble, doesn't matter which, come to Format Data Series, and choose your options. And then we're going to scale our bubble to 50% of its original size and press Enter. And that's obviously made our chart a lot easier to read. Now we need a few more tweaks. Let's look at Qatar over here. It's a bit of an extreme value. In fact, you'll only see two countries, Norway and Qatar, actually have a GDP per capita of over 80,000. So we're going to change our axes so we can get a better view of the majority of the data. So select your horizontal axis, come to your axis options, and we're going to make that go from 0 because we don't need a negative, and then we're just going to remove the 1 in front of that, 80,000, and that's made the data already more readable. And then we're going to do something similar for our y-axis. So we'll start that at -1 to give space for our bubbles, and then take that to 31, which will let Trinidad and Tobago fit in, but scale the axes so it's a little better, and we can now see our data much more clearly. Now, an ethics note here, you should put a note under your graph that you've removed Norway and Qatar by adjusting the axes, because we don't want to pretend that those two values don't exist. Let's make one final tweak to this. We're going to come up to our chart designs, and we're going to choose an option that makes our bubbles that much clearer. So have a look at these with your bubble charts in particular, as some of them will highlight the bubbles much better. So that's looking really good, but without the chart labels, Rowan's had another idea. He would like to color the bubbles by region. Now at the moment, this is just one single series, so you'd have to use all sorts of tedious procedures to try and recolor each bubble manually, which is not going to be very efficient. But what you can do with both scatter and bubble charts is you can add multiple series, and if you add each region as its own series, then you can color code them. So what Rohan has done to the right over here is actually prepared the region data in 5 separate blocks. And he's actually already created the bubble chart over here. So what he did was he started by creating the bubble chart just for Africa, and then he's gone and manually added each of the other blocks, and there's just one more left to add, and that's Europe. And we're going to look at how to do that. So select your chart, come up to select data. You'll see that there are 4 series that have been added so far. We're going to click add, and we're going to add Europe. Our X values are our GDP, so we're just going to select that. Our Y values, and just be careful to remove what's already there, are our emissions, and our bubble size is our population. And click OK. Now you'll notice that Europe has now been added as a red series. One final little tweak, Africa is pale green, and you'll see has been kind of hidden by the Asian countries, which are so large here. So the way it works is the most recently added series goes on top, but you can re-sequence them. So I'm going to click on Africa and just click the down arrow to move it down, and now Africa is coming on top of Asia, and we can see it a little bit more clearly. I'm going to click OK. Brilliant. Come back into our chart, and let's just add a legend, and I'm going to put that at the bottom of the chart, and now we have a completed bubble chart. So scatter and bubble charts, excellent for showing correlations between values in your data.